Welcome, everybody. All right, today we're talking about doom scrolling. I call it death scrolling, but it's doom scrolling. What in the world is that? Well, it is the compulsive habit of endlessly reading negative or scary news online. And it happens because our brains are wired to look for danger, to stay safe. And so a lot of phone apps use random rewards like a slot machine to keep us swiping for more. And so it's called an algorithm. So the algorithm follows your patterns and whatever you delay watching or spend time, if you briefly stop on any kind of anything you're scrolling, it's going to note that as, oh, you like this stuff. And then it's going to send you more of that. Now that can get you in a lot of trouble if you're one of these people that loves, things like pornography and stuff like that. It can get you in a lot of trouble, those algorithms. So you may want to think about how you doom scroll. But here's the bottom line. If you really think about it, when we used to have four TV channels and people read magazines, when people went to a restaurant for lunch and they were by themselves, most of the time, they would have to either engage another person or read the paper or read a magazine. What's happened is our phones have become our company. They are our perpetual best friend. They are the access we have to the entire world right there. And so it's not that doom scrolling is something that is foreign to mankind. It's not foreign to mankind. It's what the newspapers used to be. It's what magazines used to be. It's what television had used to be. It's what computers used to be. And now we are fully engaged in our smartphones. And our smartphones make us dumber. But what happens is our brain gets addicted to the desire to be able to avoid everybody else and to look cool, to look like you're occupied so that other people do not stare at you. Because when people are doing nothing, they fill a void. So if you're just sitting there staring at a wall and people are seeing you, or if you're eating and everybody's watching you, it's very uncomfortable. But if you have your phone, now you have company. And so that phone is like your security blanket. It's called an object constant. It comes with you everywhere you go, and you find great comfort in your phone because no matter what's happening, you can distract yourself and look like you're busy, or look like you're occupied, or look like you're doing something important with your phone. And that helps people's self-esteem. But why the brain gets stuck? We get stuck in doom scrolling oftentimes when you're laying there before you go to bed because we have a negative bias in our brain and our minds focus more on threats than good news to survive. The other part is the slot machine effect. Random rewards release tiny bursts of feel good chemicals that make us want more. So, one of the things that when I'm scrolling, because I doom scroll sometimes, is history. I love to read history and I love to read facts about history. And when I stumble across all kinds of different facts about history, to me, that's a reward. It's like a slot machine. I get more and more and more and more. And now I get a continuous stream of facts about history that come to me while I'm doom scrolling. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because you can learn when you're doom scrolling. But doom scrolling is more about the negative news, the negative habit of reinforcing what's called a cognitive bias, your narrative of the world that you are trying, or your narrative of your local politics or your national politics or your global concerns, whatever those biases are, you're going to look for everything impossible out there in the universe to reinforce your point of view. You don't care about anything else. All you care about is your point of view, and everything else is evil or the enemy. Then there's this false sense of control because reading bad news feels like a way to stay prepared. People love to read bad news so they feel like they can judge and are in charge. especially about politics. They love that, especially around Trump. They love to criticize Trump while they project their own ego on Trump as a negative thing. They can't help themselves but read bad news because that makes them feel superior. But in the end, because they're not in charge of the outcome, it creates a lot of worry. So, yes, you are hearing bad things and you're going, aha, these people are terrible. And then on the bad side, you're not seeing how they are controlling the outcome and you're freaking out about that. Now, what happens is when we doom scroll, it creates a lot of problems in your brain. Number one, it derives a high stress. It triggers the body's fight or flight response, causing headaches or fast heart rates, especially if you are emotionally tied to a topic that you're doom scrolling. Also, bad moods. It leads to higher rates of anxiety, sadness, mental burnout. If you're one of these people that is into pornography, you're probably moving away from your spouse in a sense of what you're interested in because they're not going to be able to compete with what you're looking at. And then there's sleep loss, and there's guilt and shame, by the way, behind that. And then there's sleep loss. Staring at a bright screen at night tricks your brain into staying awake. You know, if you really want to stop this doom scrolling thing, and we'll talk about this later, but there's some things you can do. Number one is you really want to set hard limits. You want to use a built-in phone tools to block apps after a set time. You also want to change the view. Switch your screen to black and white to make it less fun to look at. Not a bad idea. You know, it might be finding a real activity, like swap your phone for a book or a puzzle or walk outside when you're bored. You know, you have to ask yourself, when are you scrolling? At night, in the morning, during work? What kind of content pulls you in? News, social media, videos. Here's the problem. If you're watching news, social media, and videos, all of those are biased resources. So, for instance, people love to create things like podcasts and little clips on YouTube and all kinds of things where they're giving you their opinion, they're creating channels, and they're giving you opinions as if they're facts. People are stupid. People are lazy. People lack research. People lack the willingness to look farther beyond their cognitive bias and actually get an objective point of view. And so what they do is they espouse their points of view without research to you as if it's facts, and then you sit there and believe them as if it's facts. And this is how our news is made up nowadays. It's really sad, it's really biased, and it's really not good, but us as people, we are very, very easily influenced. So, you know, with doom scrolling, you're scanning headline after headline for, blaring bad things. You're doing something that is definitely, you're not alone in the world because you know that other people are doing the same thing. And once again, when you're looking for bad things, it makes you feel like you are in control. It makes you feel like you have something to judge. Now, that is an ego boost, but on the other side of it is you're empty because you have no control of the outcome. So, on the other side of it, you have no power. And reminding yourself of that and noting yourself that you do not have power is very depressing and it causes a lot of anxiety. So, yes, you may feel good about reading about somebody else's disaster and judging what's going on, but on the other side of it, you're getting nothing. And what happens is you're empty, and all you have is a conversation and a complaint. You know, it's an understandable urge to doom scroll. And with wars raging, frequent mass shootings, multiple climate disasters, all the progressives making their Broadway productions about what they have to advocate, even though it's not even good for the human race, all the crazy liberals who go along with them because they're weak and spineless. All the crazies out there, all the homeless and the crazies and the socialists and the communists and all their stupidity. where they're taking over cities, taking over life, taking over generations of lazy ass young people who don't want to get a job. It's amazing. It's amazing. And we just get caught up in it. So there's a lot of craziness in this world. The people that are after ICE when they're trying to get rid of illegal aliens in our country. It's amazing how much we as human beings are nice people. We let things happen and then we don't have the spine to stop it when it takes us for granted. There's also a polarized populace poised to vote in another election. And these people are voting. The crazies are voting. The crazies who have been programmed over and over throughout their entire childhood by the school system, by their teachers, by their professors, by their worthless degrees that they pay $80,000, $85,000 a year for. These people are angry and they want change because the world does not revolve around their ugly ass. And that's what they want it to be. And Trump, who's the president, has all the power that they wish they could have, so they hate him for it. And so they project all their hate on our president. Many of us scan hungrily through doom scrolling constantly. We hit refresh and we stream, and then we start all over again on a new topic. In the Oxford English Dictionary, words of the year in 2020, that what rose to prominence during the pandemic when our upended lives prodded us to relentlessly track the latest COVID casualties, doom scrolling became the thing. And 7 years later, we're still living through huge social, political, economic unrest. Doom scrolling has emerged as an insidious threat to our minds and our bodies. And these young people, up until 30 and 40, even the old, now people across all generations, are doom scrolling, and what they're basically doing is programming their minds into depression and programming their minds into ideologies that are not even relevant to the human race. With the media's propensity to blast mostly bad news because, selling bad news is how they make a living, we're not getting messages about hope. It's all negativity because the brain thrives on negativity, on judgment. It's been an onslaught, especially when the media cannot even report one good thing about the best president we've ever had in the history of the United States. They cannot wrap their brain around one positive thing because their brains have been doom scrolling for so long that they bought their own bullshit. Who's susceptible? Everybody. If you have a device, it's open season. The behavior of doom scrolling is rooted in our brain's limbic system. And this is referred to as our lizard reptilian brain. And that's dominated by a structure called the amygdala. And it promotes self-preservation and it drives the fight or flight response to danger, fueling us to troll for threats. Why? Because we want to be stimulated. Like when you were children, you loved to be scared, so you watched the horror movies, and then you were scared. Well, that's what people do when they're doom scroll. They're looking for a milder version of being scared. They're looking for stimulation because they're bored. And the truth about bored people, they are boring. These people who are doom scrollers are the most boring human beings on the planet Earth. They are the most undereducated people on the planet Earth because they are looking for worthless information, worthless negative reinforcement instead of learning something. Not learning something from a bias, but actually learning something from objectivity and creativity. Stress strokes our primary urge to scroll. It's a coping skill. So every time you're stressed out, you can go into your phone and you can find something to distract your brain. And we're very hypervigilant scanning for danger. So the more you scroll, the more you feel the need to scroll. Because the world in many people's view, is a very unsafe place. And the truth is, it is a very unstable, unsafe place. And so when you're looking at what the world is out there, it makes you not want to go into it. Or if you're going to go into it, you're going to go into it with a lot of skepticism. There's two key groups that are especially vulnerable: women and people with a history of trauma. Women are hit harder by doom scrolling because most of the violent media is about hurting women and hurting children. Meanwhile, people who've lived through violence doom scroll out of fear. So it reinforces both. That's why these crazy ass progressive women with their purple hair are psychotic, because they are addicted to their little phones and addicted to their social media and reinforcing each other with all of their negativity. And then you add the trauma factor on it. Now you've got a double dose or not a triple dose of psychosis. These people that are doom scrollers, they don't feel safe in the world, especially people that are traumatized. They want to get a handle on what's going on so they can calm their anxiety. So they look at doom scrolling as a way to kind of watch the valley to see what kind of creature is going to attack you next. And the doom scrolling also acts as a trigger for trauma. So it reinforces that factor in your brain. You've got to be very careful with this doom scrolling, because what you scroll makes a big, big difference. It would be so much better if you derive topics that would educate and expand your brain rather than sit there and stare at stuff that reinforces your own views and your own psychology and your own sickness. Especially these purple hair, crazy ass middle aged women that all listen to each other gaggle on about the same progressive bullshit every day of their lives. And then they're going to drive us all to our graves. All right, so let's take a quick break and we'll come back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about doom scrolling. Perhaps unsurprisingly, stomach churning news has a tendency to turn our stomachs, but nausea is far from the only physical effect of doom scrolling. Others can include headaches, muscle tension, neck and shoulder pain, low appetite, difficulty sleeping, even elevated blood pressure. Man, this doom scrolling thing actually, because it's negative based, can actually kill you. It can actually lessen the length of your life. When people doom scroll for hours, they're sedentary for a long time, and the ripple effects are vast and problematic. In the wake of the pandemic, doom scrolling mental health effects have been examined more extensively. Back in 2023, research review by the Applied Research and Quality of Life analyzed 3 separate studies involving a total of 1,200 adults, suggesting doom scrolling is linked to worse mental well-being and life satisfaction. And then on forward into 2024, a study of 800 adults in computers and human behavior reports reinforces the same findings, that doom scrolling evokes greater levels of existential anxiety, a feeling of dread. What is existential anxiety? It's limbo. It's living without any momentum. A feeling of dread or panic when we confront the limitations of our existence. In another study in Computers and Human Behavior back in 2024, it also said that employees who doom scroll while at work may become less engaged with their professional tasks. So this can destroy people. And yes, all these stupid ass COVID people who quit their $150,000 jobs so they could work at Starbucks were probably doom scrolling while they were doing their jobs and got so depressed that they quit. On a practical level, doom scrolling can give us a popcorn brain, which happens when we spend too much time online. It's the real biological phenomenon of feeling your brain is popping because you're overstimulated. And then it's hard to engage with the real world, which moves to a much slower pace. That's the truth. The world moves at a much slower pace than you would like it to. We want to be entertained by the world. The world is not here to entertain us. We are living. We are here to entertain ourselves. And that is the problem. We lack the creativity because we leave it to our phones. And then what do? We do things that are stupid to get people's attention. And then we do a lot of damage to others who have to be involved in the stupid things you do to get attention to yourselves. We are just demonstrating how progressively dumber we are becoming as human beings. And we're going to get really, really dumb now that we have AI. While keeping abreast of current events, it's essential. Doom scrolling provides no extra benefits. We need to stay informed, but not at the expense of our mental health. Cutting back is not about abstinence, it's about decreasing. That's the most important part. How do you want to accomplish this? Well, you have to have strategies, mainly revolving around creating boundaries that can give your brain and body a chance to recalibrate to normal. So, number one, keep your phone off your nightstand. That doesn't mean it can't be in the bedroom, but keeping your phone out of easy reach means you can't compulsively grab it upon waking. It could be the biggest game changer in stress from doom scrolling. And also, you're acclimating yourself instead to wake up in the light to look at your bed partner rather than your phone, and to have conversations with your bed partner. Not a bad thing. You also want to follow suit in your workplace. Place your phone in the desk drawer, 10 or more feet away from where you're planted during work hours. Now, this is a rather dramatic thing to do, but honest to God, this thing gets in the way. You need to put it in a place where you're not just staring at it all the time. Every time the light comes on and a new story pops up, or a new email pops up, or a new text pops up, you're going to go to that instead of be doing the very, very important things that you need to be accomplishing at work. Work deserves your brain. It deserves your focus. Your children deserve your brain, your focus. Your partner deserves your brain and your focus and your presence. You also want to go to grayscale. The type of visual boundary makes scrolling less enticing by dialing back the saturation levels of colors on the screen. There's some early data that this decreases screen time by making the colors dimmer or going to black and white. You also want to opt out of notifications. These types of beeps and dings, which alert us to new headlines, emails, messages, and the like, are self-selected. And every time that they come up, it invites you back into the need to doom scroll. And so we want to be able to control ourselves. It's called, self-regulation. And we as adults need to do that, especially with these phones. Opting out of these notifications is a simple way, and you do it in your phone settings. This is about reestablishing boundaries. Are you using your device, or is your device using you? The truth is, the device more often is using the person, because once again, it deals in algorithms, which are constant stimulation for your brain. You also want to focus on community news. Local headlines tend to be less doom and gloom and more uplifting. Stick to the environment you live in, because on the national news, they're looking for every possible negative story all over the country. And then they're going to highlight those stories in local communities to the nation and to the world. That's how they make money. But on the local news side, they balance a little bit better, except for now that they're all psychotic also. The liberals have basically taken over everything as far as our media. And so they've got their psychotic stories, and then they've got maybe some positive, nice stories about people. So community news, you got a better shot at getting more positivity. I'm not saying watch community news, because once again, I live in Seattle, and these people are batshit crazy psychotics. You also want to say no. Tell people who are sharing depressing or violent stories that you're not interested. This puts you in control. You're not giving your power to someone else. You also want to focus on the good. You want to volunteer at a charity or some other altruistic organization like an animal shelter or a church. Take part in emotional freeing activities like dance class or nature walks or judo or something, go to a gym. You need to share positive emotional experiences not only with yourself but with other people. This helps create balance. You also want to talk to your doctor. If you find you can't stop doom scrolling, that makes you extremely upset, it's time to discuss it with a professional. A small percentage of people really need professional help, and the best place to start is your primary care doctor. Because this kind of doom scrolling is a sign of depression and anxiety, and it reinforces that over and over and over again. And depression and anxiety are highly treatable. What is depression? It is unmet expectations. That is what creates depression. What creates anxiety? Fear. And when you have unmet expectations and fear, your brain is going to play a three-ring circus of negativity all day long, every day. And it's going to be really, really hard when your kid is sitting there saying, I'm hungry or I need this. I mean, they practically have to throw themselves at your feet to get your attention because of all your doom scrolling and depression. Doom scrolling usually refers to, once again, and we're redefining it, repeatedly scrolling through upsetting, threatening, pessimistic news and social content. And it's often for longer than you intend, and often without feeling better. It's not the same thing as staying informed. The difference is that staying informed tends to be intentional and time limited, while doom scrolling tends to feel repetitive, urgent, and hard to disengage from. So, why is it so addictive? Once again, your brain is built to notice threats. This is a very, very primitive part of your brain. Human attention naturally gives extra weight to danger, conflict, and uncertainty. Doom scrolling creates and reinforces that the world is made up of negative things that are threatening you every day of your life, all day long. So, doom scrolling reinforces the fight or flight mechanisms in your brain. Now, is that going to be prefrontal cortex, highly intelligent thinking? No, it's going to be fear based, reactive. And if you want to be a reactive person instead of a proactive person, doom scroll your whole life and see what happens with your intelligence. Doom scrolling tends to create the sense of danger, uncertainty, and our brains are more likely to lock into potential threats than neutral, reassuring information. And the bias can make negative headlines feel important, even when continuing to consume them no longer is useful. The other thing is, uncertainty makes people want one more update. One of the strongest psychological drivers behind doom scrolling appears to be the intolerance of uncertainty, wanting to know immediately what's going on in the world, what is happening with this peace treaty, what's going on with ICE. Are they trying to? How many more people are they trying to kill as far as ICE is concerned and destroy them? What's going on, with our border, what's going on internationally, with Iran, all these crazy things. People feed into that over and over. What's going on with all these crazy ass Minnesota people that love fraud and Somalis? you know when the world feels unstable, the brain often tries to reduce that discomfort by checking in for new information. And the problem is that constant checking rarely creates real closure. Instead, it can keep the nervous system activated. In other words, doom scrolling often feels like an attempt to gain control, but can leave you feeling less grounded instead. There's also this fear of missing out leaves the loop going. So there's a lot of research that suggests that doom scrolling is associated with fear of missing out, especially when people feel the need to stay constantly updated on what might happen next. And that can create a very powerful internal script. If I stop scrolling, I might miss something important. Well, guess what? There's the real good chance if something is real important, You're going to find out pretty soon, and it'll be okay because there's nothing you can do about it anyway. Even when the content is distressing, that urge keeps you coming back. You know, people that are operating the internet and these applications and these social media sites, they know this. They know this psychology and they feed on it over and over and over again. The other thing is phones make the behavior frictionless. Doom scrolling is easy to repeat because the tools are always within your reach. And some newer research suggests nomophobia, or what it's called is a distress around being separated from your phone. Nomophobia. And that may help explain why doom scrolling is linked to poorer sleep with more persistent nighttime use. And that does not mean everyone who doom scrolls has nomophobia, but it does mean that the convenience and the habit and the digital dependence can make it harder to stop. You know, if 30 to 60 minutes feels unrealistic, start smaller. Even a shorter buffer can help. You know, replace endless scrolling with planned check-ins. Instead of checking whenever anxiety spikes, try deciding in advance when you will look at the news. Make appointments to do that. For example, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, not after dinner. This helps interrupt the just one more update loop that uncertainty can really create. You know, it also, you can add friction to the habit. Because doom scrolling is easy and automatic, even small barriers help. You might want to move news apps off your home screen, log out of social media apps at night, turn off non essential alerts, charge your phone outside the bedroom, and use app timers and focus settings. Here's some other things to do. Notice what emotion is driving the urge. Because we are driven, our impulses are driven by emotions. Every decision you make has an emotional attachment to it. Before you open the app, pause and ask, am I looking for useful information? This is very, very important. Now, how do you know that you're doom scrolling? Well, here's a few signs. You keep scrolling after you already feel overwhelmed. You feel more agitated, hopeless, or wired. You check for updates compulsively, especially at night. You tell yourself it's important, even when the content is the same crap you've been reading over and over and over again. You know, the truth is, with most people on this planet, you have about 100 thoughts in a day. Now, if you have one original thought, you're a freaking genius. But here's the deal. Most of the time, we're just regurgitating the same old crap over and over again, and every time we swipe it, we tell ourselves a new story about the same information. You know, if you're going to be agitated and hopeless and wired after doom scrolling, why would you do that to your brain? Peace is the acceptance of the unacceptable. The world is unacceptable. There's many things in your life that are unacceptable. And one of the things that could be unacceptable is the idea that you no longer have to watch the news all the time. You know, when you're gonna have trouble doom scrolling. If you think it's a bad habit, here's another sign. You have trouble stopping, even when you want to stop. Your mood, your sleep, your focus keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Your availability to your spouse, to your children, to your life, to your work become less and less and less. So the higher your anxiety, the higher your depression, the more likely you're going to doom scroll. Staying informed usually leaves you oriented. Doom scrolling leaves you depleted. The goal is not to become uninformed. The goal is to make your news and social media more intentional and less punishing. Number one, you want to put boundaries around when you consume news. You know, if doom scrolling is strongest at night, do not make bedtime your news window. Research suggests that doom scrolling and poor sleep are linked. So this is one of the highest impact changes to try first. No news in bed. No scrolling for the last 30 to 60 minutes before you fall asleep. And if you want updates, check them earlier in the day. These are things you can do to help yourself. And it's very important for you to have self-esteem and self-control. People who say no to things that hurt them build their self-esteem. You need to set boundaries around this thing because this habit is exactly what social media makes billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars by capturing your particular brain with your particular desires, and then it just keeps throwing it up on your phone over and over and over again. Maybe you've had a moment like it too, reaching for your phone in mid conversation, feeling your stomach drop when your weekly screen time report arrives. These small but telling moments remind us how easily we pull away from the people right in front of us. And it's not just a matter of discipline. Research shows that a smartphone activates the brain's reward pathways more like gambling and shopping. And it isn't just teenagers glued to TikTok. It touches everybody, children, adults, elders, neurodivergent people, those living with ADHD, that poor impulsive people, autism, learning differences. These can be pulled even stronger into doom scrolling since our brains are especially sensitive to dopamine driven designs. And once again, the news is the dopamine, and then knowing you can do nothing about it is the depression and the anxiety. So you're setting your brain up for something that never comes. That's why it's important to say this clearly. Phone overuse isn't a personal failing. You're not broken. You're responding exactly as industries design the smartphone to work. But you need to you need to get in front of the harm that this does to program your brain. And we're seeing this programmed brains voting now and voting for the batshit crazy psychotic people who are running for office all over this country to try to run our lives into the ground. It is so sad that we are being programmed because these people are not stupid. They know how to program you because they've been programmed themselves. And so they're going to influence these young people and these people that are voting for these psychotics, and these people are psychotic themselves. And now they're to the point they're so psychotic they're almost unemployable and living in their mother or their dad's basement, for years playing video games or eating or playing with themselves, whatever the hell they're doing, but they sure as hell aren't working. All right, let's take another break and we'll come right back. Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about doom scrolling. You have to ask yourself, what small step can I take that makes this less harmful right now? Naming the problem can be very powerful, but naming it again and again is what shifts our patterns. Each pause to ask what scrolling gives or takes away turns instinct into a choice point. Instead of I failed again by doom scrolling, I noticed that I was doom scrolling. That shift of judgment to curiosity is a foundation of harm reduction. You want to ask yourself, what is this scrolling giving me? What is it taking away? What might I gain from 30 minutes less a day? Sometimes the answers will be uncomfortable, but writing them down will help you see patterns. We feel lonely, especially when we doom scroll. We feel anxious and depressed when we doom scroll. Now, initially, we feel excited, and then suddenly we feel anxious and depressed because you have to react to what you interact with online. There's also this thing called the rule of three. Each time you reach for your phone, pause for 10 seconds and ask, what time is it? What am I feeling? What do I actually need right now? That pause will create a wedge of choice between impulse and action. There's also a thing called the pocket pause. Each time you pick your phone up, choose to put it away. Silently count. That was one. And by the end of the day, you will have a rough sense of how many times you reach for it. No judgment, no shame, just notice. That is very, very, very important. You also want to share your reflections with a friend. Try it at a dinner table. Every small shift matters. Compulsive phone use isn't just a personal inconvenience, it's one of the most socially accepted compulsions of our time. If you go to any restaurant, you're going to see all kinds of people doom scrolling again and again. We are losing our ability to communicate with each other. We are losing our ability to connect with each other. We're losing our ability to feel. We are one big basket of numb people walking the planet detached from our emotions. By the way, trauma, if you think about it, if you are a person that's traumatized, you are numb much of the time, or you go numb when you're re traumatized and you don't have access to your emotions. That means you need treatment. And if you doom scroll to escape your numbness, that's even better chance for you to get treatment. And you owe it to anybody in your life to do that. There's other kinds of scrolling. There's hope scrolling or joy scrolling, which is the intentional search for positive, uplifting, and inspiring online content. Instead of feeding your brain bad news, you look for stories that bring joy, hope, and peace. Hope scrolling is looking for good news, solutions, inspiring stories. Joy scrolling, scrolling through funny, cute, happy posts that make you smile. Then there's glee freshing, refreshing a feed to find happy updates instead of bad news. Then there's a thing called rabbit tholing, following your own curiosity to learn about a fun or random topic instead of letting a bad news algorithm control your life. There's also, joy reading, reading a physical book or a magazine to relax your brain. There's also audiobooks. They are a wonderful way to help educate yourself. You can get through a book in a very short amount of time when you do audiobooks. I've gone through almost every major classic novel in the world by audiobooks. It is an incredible way to learn. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, even the Bible is so much better when it's read because most of what's in the Bible is spoken word. The Bible is so much better verbalized than it is to read the damn thing. Mindful sites like visiting calm digital spaces like Radio Garden to listen to live radio from around the world, or Window Swap to look at peaceful views from other windows. The other thing is unplugging, taking a walk without your phone. Rest your eyes, clear your head. These are things that we can do for our mental health. It is a huge, huge thing to do that. We have to also note that there's a natural psychology wanting to know all the bad news that's happening around the world. If I know all the bad news, then I can be safer in my little bubble. It's really amazing though. Our on top of constant news updates, websites and social media platforms curating information based on the content you consume, the platforms will feed you similar types of information. So if you keep going negative, it's going to feed you more negative, and it's going to feed you stronger negative. And if you're reading a bad story, it's going to pull you a worse story from a few years ago and then keep going back and back and back and back until all the content runs out. They call it doom scrolling for a reason. It feeds and reinforces anxiety and depression because it feeds the sense that everything is wrong in the world, that everything is falling apart, and that we're all doomed. And then the liberals go crazy with that stuff, and the progressives. They want us to always feel like we are doomed. They have nothing good to add to the human race because they have no ideas. They like to just sit around and complain because their brain is Swiss cheese now. When you're in that headspace for excessive periods of time, then it's not a huge leap to recognize that it can feed certain psychiatric disorders. Dealing with doom scrolling in a clinical practice, we have to understand that that means going on news freeze or allocating a specific amount of time each day for news updates. Individuals need to engage in an alternative activity that they find fulfilling. So instead of drinking alcohol, maybe you should drink coffee. You should always replace your coping skills with better coping skills. It's really about getting people re engaged with their life and feeling more productive. But here's another problem: people that are ruminative thinkers, people that they call themselves analytical. Well, analytical brains are very, very much addicted to doom scrolling. Why? Because it's a one-way conversation. It's a one-way social engagement. That's why these analytical people are also porn addicts, because they get a one-way emotional event that is safe. They control what they scroll. They don't have to interact with another human being to jack off. They don't have to interact with another person to feel emotion. And so, analytical, especially the autistic, especially the ones out in Seattle that breed with each other and create more Seattleites, these people, these people love doom scrolling, and they love to jack off to pornography because it's a one-way street. And then they're married, and then their children and their spouse get nothing from them because they get to go in their little hobbit hole, their doom scrolling and their pornography, and do their emotional events there. It's really about getting people engaged with their life, feeling more productive. They need to have some sense of control and influence in their immediate sphere and existence. Computers and phones do exactly what you tell them to do. It's a control issue. All psychosis in this world, the Axis 1 diagnosis that are man-made, depression, anxiety, OCD, all of these diagnoses that men and women come up with through their daily lives is based on the coping skill of the need to control things you cannot control. So if you're depressed, that's how you try to control things you cannot control. If you're a doom scroller, that's how you try to control things you cannot control. If you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, that's how you try to control things you cannot control. If you're into pornography, that's how you need to control things you cannot control, like your wife telling you no all the time. Or your husband. And the deal is that all of these diagnoses, the symptomology is based on the need to control things you cannot control, and how do you cope with it. The brain needs a constant stress response, so it interprets a steady stream of distressing news as immediate personal danger, and that flight or flight response gives you higher cortisol, which makes you fatter. It gives your body the high alert that you need to preserve fat to be able to protect yourself. So doom scrollers gain a lot more weight because their body is trying to protect itself. There's also a dopamine loop. It's like a slot machine. Each new piece of information provides a tiny dopamine hit. Las Vegas is built on trying to win what you lost back. I won $750,000, and then I lost $750,000 trying to make $2 million. And now I'm trying to get that $750,000 back. And so now I'm going to lose another $750,000 trying to get the $750,000 back, or $100 or $500, whatever you want to call it. But that's how Vegas was built, on these egotistical idiots that have to win the money they lost back. Once again, we talk about the popcorn brain. It's constant stimulation from bite-sized content that reduces your attention span. It makes it harder to focus on slower-paced, real-world tasks. We need to understand that we are on a journey. People with popcorn brain, people that are stimulated by dopamine hits like in doom scrolling, are destination focused. They want destination after destination after destination. They don't feel alive until they've arrived at information. No, your life is journey based. You need to have patience. You need to have relationships. And the only way to have relationships is to invest in the journey. That means the outcomes come with the journey, but that's not what you live for. It's the journey that you live for. There's also memory and decision impairment that happens with doom scrolling. Overloading your working memory for negative information leaves little room for productive thinking or logical decision making. It's just a reinforcement of cognitive bias of negative information that you've stored up to reinforce how right you are about your stupid point of view. Then there's this reality distortion. The overconsumption of negative content makes people overestimate real world dangers, creating a warped, more catastrophic view of reality. And there's long term consequences that happen with doom scrolling. Emotional burnout. Continuous exposure to distressing content causes desensitization of extreme fatigue. Your brain goes numb. And when your brain goes numb and you can't access emotions, it's really hard to be around people and they expect you to be engaged and you become a really good actor, acting like you're enthusiastic, acting like you're engaged, but you're really not. And you know it because you're numb. The poor sleep that comes with doom scrolling, mental stimulation, like the blue light from devices interfere with your sleep cycles. It leads to insomnia. Then you have the mental struggles. And that's once again, the studies link this habit over and over again to higher levels of anxiety, lower self esteem, and depression. You have to ask yourself, am I anxious? Am I lonely? Am I restless? Am I angry? Am I trying to feel in control? And the truth is, that is the state of all human beings. We are. That's why doom scrolling is so addictive. You know, the best thing to do is to try to ground yourself. Try to text a friend instead of doom scroll. Write down some specific question that you want answered and use the scrolling to educate yourself. You also want to step away for 10 minutes. Give yourself a break. Do something different and engage yourself in life. Sit down with your kid or your spouse and have a real conversation. Talk about feelings instead of what did you do? Where did you go? Who did you talk to today? Do feelings. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about this movie? How do you feel about that commercial? How do you feel about this happening in the world? If you're going to doom scroll, you can have feeling based conversations about what you doom scrolled. But one of the hardest part is feeling flooded and powerless. So what you want to do is get back into life. And one of the things you could do is volunteer. You know, support someone, participate in people's lives. Build a short exit routine to get out of this doom scrolling thing. Put it down, stand up, move your body. Start doing a gym routine. Start taking care of yourself. These are things that we need to do. 20 minutes of steady cardio is 65% of an antidepressant. So if you really want to help your brain, the best thing you can do is get your heartbeat up 20 beats a minute steady for 20 minutes. Research has found that people with higher doom scrolling scores tend to report lower mental well-being, lower life satisfaction, and less harmony. We need to take that seriously, guys. Your brains are being programmed by doom scrolling. You, by being addicted to doom scrolling, have a programmed brain, and you need to understand that. And that makes you more susceptible to things like hypnotism and manipulation and our local and watching the stupid news on MSNBC or CBS or ABC or whatever other stupid news channel like CNN that you addict yourself to. All right, that's our show. I want to thank you for listening. I love hearing from you. You can do that at voiceamericamedia.com, libsyn, libsyn.com, Dr. Gary Bell's Absurd Psychology. Now remember, doom scrolling is avoiding the curse of self-awareness. The other thing is living life is when you take a break.